Good afternoon. Welcome to Global Automotive and Mobility Innovation Challenge, GAMIC Meetup. I am Vic Vele. I am a GAMIC board member and moderator for today's panel discussion. There's always a huge question for every founder, including me. I have a great technology, but how do I open doors with these large OEMs and Tier-1s? Early stage technology companies often devote a long time to reach the right decision makers and make those connections. Introducing your innovation and seeking that first pilot or that first customer is a major milestone for a founder. The journey to commercialize a product or a solution is arduous, and you certainly could use some tips and insights from those who have already done it. So today we have assembled an experienced panel of 3 startup founders and 1 automotive executive. And we want to hear from them. They have successfully done it, and they are diligently working on growing their ventures. So now we want to learn from them. We want to know what they did right and how did they overcome the hurdles. And also then we want to get their advice to mobility innovators, that how to get that first pilot or the first validation with an OEM or a tier 1 supplier. So let us get started. So now let me introduce to you our speakers today. Julie Bloomwriter, she is the co-founder and CTO of ClearFame Engine Technologies in Illinois. Robert Isis, he's the CEO and co-founder of Orbitalist Drives. They are from Vancouver, British Columbia. John Jennings is the Director of Business Development at Means Industries here in Southfield, Michigan. Mark Zakos, he's the founder and president of DG Technologies. They are in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And David Stout, he's the general manager of Global Electronics in Michigan, and he's also the co-founder of GAMIC. And David himself has been an auto executive working on many commercialization projects. And so I work with the local mobility startups and tech startups in helping them build good ventures. So John, would you like to go first? And let's get started with John.
So hello, everybody. My name is John Jennings from Means Industries, and I'm happy to be here today to participate in the meetup. I'm also a member of the GAMIC team, where I support the innovation startup mentoring, judging, and other GAMIC organizational activities. Means Industries is a supplier primarily or historically in the automotive industry. Means designs, develops, and produces novel mechanical diode clutches and clutching solutions, as well as novel metal form products for propulsion systems. The clutching solutions can be used in a variety of applications to engage and disengage driveline power for traditional transmissions, as well as hybrid electric and pure electric propulsion systems. It means, as my title suggests, my role is to lead business development for new technologies and new markets, where I'm involved in bringing new technologies to market, as well as expanding current and new technologies to new markets globally, both within and without or outside of automotive. This can include truck, aerospace, off-highway markets, etc. Prior to Means, I spent a number of years at Ford, Visteon, Linamar, and Eaton, working in various areas of innovation, engineering, business development, and manufacturing. And during that time, I've had the responsibility for the full product life cycle from advanced R&D through all product development phases and production. And it's given me the opportunity to bring a number of new technologies from concept to production in the areas of power steering systems, steering products, axles, driveline, all-wheel drive systems, gearbox systems, as well as electric axle systems. So through this process of concept to production, this is let's say background information that I'm happy to bring forward here today. Also, while at Linamar, during the time I was Director of Innovation and Technology, I did have the opportunity to develop several projects with startup companies. One of them was a company called Softwheel out of Israel, where we worked together to launch their in-wheel suspension technology into production for the first time, and the first application, which happened to be for wheelchairs. And they are continuing to work on other markets and applications subsequent to that. And maybe just a couple comments before we go further. From an industry perspective, companies, established industry companies are continually defining and realigning their technology objectives. And the overall process tends to follow a general flow where first you define, or the company defines, problems to solve, unmet needs, defining technology roadmaps to meet those targets and solve those problems, and then finding the source of the solutions for technologies, which historically have been in R&D settings where there's a vertically integrated research with industry insights and customer feedback. But in recent years, the technology innovation startup world has really been bringing new disruptive technologies that are emerging from non-traditional places and locations. And if any company is not keeping their eye on this horizon, then the risk is that we may miss a disruptive technology that could leapfrog our own technology development. And that's why we're here today. And once we go through all that, and we'll talk, I think, a little more about how do we filter and assess the value of technologies, how do we make good matches to progress them into project plans. So yeah, I think I'm looking forward to some more discussions on that topic today. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Now, let me ask Mark Zakos. Mark, would you like to tell us about your venture and how you did how did you gain the success? Tell us your story.
Well, thanks. Try to give you a little bit of background here. I got a couple slides as well, and not so much about the small print here. I used to be an engineer and grew up in the OEM world and Tier-1 supplier world here in Detroit. But I think the story actually, from my point of view, is coming from the great opportunity I had to be involved in SAE, sometimes known as Society of Automotive Engineers. So the reason I brought that up here, and I kind of highlighted it along with my title, is that I'm still engaged very extensively with SAE and currently chairing something called the DLC Cybersecurity Committee, Standards Committee. So through that relationship with SAE, through the years, 35 years or more now, I've met many, many great fine people like those on the call today. And in fact, my very first customer came from that cadre. So the connections that I made through an organization like SAE helped me gain confidence, not only in myself and in the ideas and the technology, but I think the opportunity also to win the confidence of my cohorts who turned out to be customers, those folks that I was working with in those SAE technical standards committees. We were working on state-of-the-art and advanced advanced communication, in-vehicle communications technology, which evolved into cybersecurity. And I'm still active in that today. So I think that's one message that I'd like to share with the community. Now, Vic, another message here on the second slide, talk about what you offered up at the beginning of the meetup session. What does it take? And yeah, you need the right connections, you need the right message, you need the right technology and disruption, but all that is, in my view, immaterial. It doesn't matter. You've got the best widget in the world and you hook up with the best company in the world. They're not going to do it for you. You have to put long hours, constant attention to detail, and I guess out there in the audience, I would offer this, try to scare you away, because if you're not ready to work 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week, you should find another profession, in my view. So I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it takes. So I offer that up, whatever you do. It's, you know, my daughter plays a lot of video games and she's fairly good at it. I stink at video games like Overwatch. It's not a timepiece, guys. It's a video game. But whatever you put in, you get that back out. So it takes that practice to become an expert and to get anything out of your technology, the best idea in the world. You've got to invest that time. So that's part one. And then part two is, you know, I don't know if you guys recognize him. I'm going to give you a hint. That's Eminem, the rap artist. And I think it's very true what he says there. So the truth, you know, you never know what's going to happen. So be prepared for that as well. No matter how hard you work, you got to pick yourself up and run with the ball once again. So my office is on 8 Mile Road here in suburban Detroit. So you might see what's the connection with Eminem. So that's kind of the background there. I like his music too. Okay, so thank you, Vic. Back to you.
Audience, if you have any questions, please, as we start the conversation, please put those questions into the Q&A box, not in the chat box. So that way we can answer your questions. And we want to take a lot of questions from you in this discussion today. So the next, I would like to invite now both the mobility founders. Julie, would you like to give a brief introduction to your company and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Julie Bloomreiter. I'm the co-founder and CTO of ClearFlame Engine Technologies. And what we're working on at ClearFlame is just trying to drive this fast path to decarbonization using existing infrastructure, keeping high performance of diesel equipment, and then producing the clean emissions that are not only compatible with future regulation in the industry, but then also with the clean and sustainable world we want to live in. So I just share this to give you a little bit of context around the discussion that we'll have later. So ClearFlame was founded by myself and BJ Johnson in 2016 after we wrapped up our PhDs at Stanford University. And one of the things that came out of our time there was this idea that the diesel engine could actually be the hero of this decarbonization story because it has so many great attributes. And so what we're really doing is trying to drive that, is empowering the best attributes of the diesel engine to produce this clean and sustainable future we want to live in. We do this by making just a minimal subset of changes to the engine that create this high temperature environment. And what that allows is for clean burning fuels, things like ethanol or methanol, to burn as if they were diesel fuel. And that's why we're able to maintain all the same performance benefits while achieving such low emissions. And so even though there might be some additional components to create that high temperature environment, because we have such clean exhaust, we can actually drastically simplify on the back. And so, this is an example of the type of thing you need to figure out when you're doing a startup, is where does the value come in, and where can you provide this different value to the different people in the supply chain that'll eventually be who brings about producing your technology. So our journey also included a lot of distinguished incubators and competitions, including the Chain Reaction Innovation Program at Argonne National Laboratory. And we also participated in GAMIC, I think 2 or 3 years ago now, as well as several grants and grant partners, OEMs that were willing to write us letters of support for those grants. Our most recent achievement is demonstrating our technology on a 15-liter engine, and that was partly funded by our first venture capital raise. And then finally, an integral part to any startup success is really the people around you. So we are so fortunate to have a group of experienced and engaged advisors, many of whom are either retired or still working in OEMs or Tier-1s in the space, and they've just been so critical to our development. That's the end of my brief summary, but I'm really looking forward to the discussion and any questions you have.
Great. Thank you very much, Julie. And now finally, Robert, would you like to tell us about your exciting venture? Yeah.
Certainly, Vic. I'll just share my screen here as well. Everybody can see that. Yes, thanks, Vic and group for having Orbitalist participate and talk about the wonderful entrepreneurship journey that we, as many others, are participating in. My name, again, Rob Isis. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Orbitalist Drives. We are a Vancouver, Canada-based company that has developed a novel, low-loss, low-noise, high-efficiency gear platform where we're focused primarily on electric actuators and powertrains for a variety of markets, including e-mobility and automotive, but broader than automotive itself. We also look at a number of different markets. And one of the things as we started our journey, it's really understanding, because gears and gear motors are used in so many different applications, one of our biggest challenges has been trying to define exactly the best place for Orbitalist and where it can fit. And that's just a typical sort of market development type activity that everybody needs to go through, unless you have a very narrow, specific sort of application. But what we definitely saw is that in the move to electrify everything, including anything from powertrains in an EV to all the actuators, doors, windows, seats in the EV, to really anything in motion control, from robotics, medical devices, home automation, energy, there is a tremendous move to electrify anything. So, that's been great that there's a big market for this. The danger is there's a big market and it's hard to focus on anything. So when I talk about Orbitalist in terms of our journey and what we're experiencing and how we've attacked the market, we really look through a phase of sort of, we got from concept to ideation in terms of where it can fit, through some funding challenges, then some prototyping challenges, and finally through to some commercialization. Now, we're not at the commercialization stage yet, but we have numerous prototypes going on. And how we've done that is by really looking at the ecosystem and really trying to understand which market we should focus on, like I said, and which customers should we focus on. So we went out to the market in the automotive space in particular, and I'll talk about that specifically, is we thought, hey, EVs, everybody in the EV world is talking about low NVH, high efficiency, low noise type solutions because of the move to that. So we really put an effort on that, and we participated and really tried to understand the ecosystem. So as a startup, it's not just having a widget, it's about understanding who cares about that widget. And not just in terms of an end customer, because that's great, but it's about how does this product and technology get into the market? Who needs to be your partners? Who needs to be your coaches and your supporters? So we started with talking with OEMs. We started talking to Tier-1s. We started talking to Tier-2s, really anybody that would listen. And how we did that was through participation in a lot of different events and things like the GAMIC program through the SAE. We did a lot of talks through VDI out of Germany with a couple of trade shows there. Shows called DryTev, shows the Startup Autobahn group in Germany, another accelerator there. BMW Startup Garage, and so on. And what we did is build a bit of a noise around Orbitalist that there's something there. And that led us to get through to getting some initial discussions with partners about, yes, there's something here about Orbitalist that really makes sense. Now, how do we move to the next step? And hardware is a little bit different than software because it's a little bit harder, right? You've got to design, build, test things. And it's been a long journey to get to that stage. But we're making good progress. And really the progress is due to participation and getting support through organizations such as GAMIC to get us in front of the right people and get us introduced to different organizations that care, right? And I'll go into that a little bit later. We're gonna have a little bit more of a session on that. But the key thing is it takes time. You gotta be diligent, like some of the other folks say, right? But you got to understand who your market is and who really cares within your market to take a technology. So happy to answer any questions on that as we move forward. Thanks, Vic.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. And if you stop sharing your screen, then maybe we all can see all the people on the panel. They will be visible to the audience. Let's see. And Julie, are you? Okay, great. So now, and John, you are coming on? Yeah, there you go. So we are still getting Mark there. We don't see you, Mark, on the screen. So let me start with the first question. And that's, we all know that. Is this pandemic, how it is affecting you as a startup? And especially for Julie and Robert, and Mark, has it made it easier or difficult? Because being virtual, now probably it's easier to reach out to people than old days. We couldn't get hold of them. So what do you guys think?
I'll take a first little crack at it. For us, I think it's actually made us focus a little bit more on a couple of projects versus trying to be too broad. So we had a couple of projects that we were starting on just at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's been good to focus, but unfortunately the supply chain within the whole market has slowed dramatically. So it has slowed some projects in terms of getting them done in terms of prototyping, but it's made us focus a little bit more on those to get those done properly. So there's a bit of good and bad, and I'm always a silver lining kind of guy where I like to look at the optimistic view of this and say, you know, you got to make lemonade out of lemons and just figure it out and kind of adjust, right? But it has been a bit of a challenge to move things faster, I'd say.
So Julie, what do you think? Same, what's your feeling?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I think the pandemic has really highlighted is that, you know, these regulations or this need to, you know, lower emissions is not just sort of taking a break because of the pandemic. You know, those deadlines are still coming, and that urgency is still there. So for us, it was critical to figure out how we could keep innovating and making progress, like on the time frame of those sort of fixed deadlines. And, you know, being a startup gives you a little bit more flexibility. So we were able to find some more creative ways to keep getting prototyping and testing done, either, you know, through more remote partnerships with other test facilities and things like that. But yeah, certainly a challenge. Certainly, you know, as one of the founders, concern over, you know, employee safety is absolutely at the front of my mind. But then also being the scrappy startup, you can be pretty creative pretty quickly. And that maybe, you know, like he said, turn it into lemonade, like try and turn that into our advantage, that we can move fast right now.
That's interesting. And Mark, what's your experience working with our local?
Well, I think there's some good and bad. One of the things we're into with the company is cybersecurity. So it's kind of a restart for us in our business model. And as you've heard many times, people hacking into Zoom meetings and all the other cybersecurity issues. I think there is a great visibility afforded by this, I guess I'll call it opportunity, the pandemic in some sense. But there is a drawback, a huge drawback, in that business is done with people, and it's great to meet them via Zoom. It's great to have that dialogue through chat windows, but it's not the same. The other drawback is that your team is dispersed, and you miss, of course, that creativity, that interaction. That you go get a cup of coffee. Hey, what did you think about that or that line of code? Or there's so much opportunity generated from those type of interactions that we're missing. So I guess from our company point of view, yeah, we're okay right now, but it's definitely going to harm as time goes on.
Okay. And so, John, from your perspective, I know you used to travel all over the world looking for these innovations and the startups. Where are you? How is it going?
Yeah, the pandemic certainly put a halt to the traveling, especially the global traveling. So I would say, like, from an automotive industry standpoint, the early part of the year was very slow. There was a lot of uncertainty with regard to budgets, what the future was bringing. But around August, September time period, I would say there was a massive renewal of projects for the remainder of the year, and then looking into 2021. And the great thing, or the fortunate thing, is that the automotive production has, from a production standpoint, it's actually renewed because inventories were depleted and those have to be caught up, and then there's still a demand that's happening. So I would say that the renewed spirit is, how do we go forward when we can't yet travel, go face to face, go to the industry conferences, and from our point of view, connect with the startups and the innovators and the new technologies and industry partners as well. So we're looking at new ways to continue on with the same objectives, and the same technology roadmaps and discoveries that we were before. It's just, how do we do it virtually until travel becomes possible again? So I would say there's a lot of reinventing happening right now across the board as to how to do that inside the companies, between the supply chain customers, as well as the innovators in the R&D world.
So John, let me start with you then. What do you expect from a startup when they try to reach out to you? Maybe they made a first contact through LinkedIn, or you just got their business card, they met you somewhere at the show, like SAE.
What I look for, and I think what a lot of companies look for, is the first thing that comes to mind is, what is the technology and what problem is it going to solve? And my mind will quickly jump to, how does this compare to competitive technologies existing or in development? So, is there IP around it, or potential IP? Is there truly novelty from a practical standpoint that solves the problems or improves the areas of interest that customers want? And so when we look at the IP, we look at, is it it's possible to have patents, but are the patents clean? Is the space open? Is there, or on the other hand, is it a crowded IP space that might have a lot of competition? So we look at how novel is the technology, how well is it suited to solve the problems. We're not looking for just inventions for invention's sake, but we're looking for innovations that solve real problems that are of a priority. The other things that, a couple things that I've learned to look for really quickly through some lessons learned is um, off the off the bat, what are the business model? What is the business model or models of a startup company? Are they looking to grow it as a company? Are they looking to sell technology IP with a partner? Are they looking for exclusive strategic partners? This is very important to understand the approach. And that ties very well together with how can this be applied and taken to market. The other thing I look for too, again, lessons learned is, does the startup have a good set of advisors, industry advisors? Is there a CEO, or is it a one man or two person show where the inventor is trying to build a business? So I think finding a company as as we progress down the road to try and make a deal work or try to bring a innovation to market, it's important that the structure of the company and the expectations and having a good balance of business that works side by side with the techies or the inventors, I think is an important balance, and having those outside advisors, those experienced advisors, either on a board of directors or as a board of advisors, who those people are, having a good balance is really important. I've learned to look for that pretty early on.
Okay, well, thank you. And so, Mark, having heard from John, what is the secret sauce you have? Because you have been doing this for 30 years, and you build a great company. Quickly, can you tell people what how did you go around doing this?
Yeah, well, John, you brought up excellent advice and points. Basically, I didn't know what I was doing. I think the same is true now, but yeah, early on, I was reaching for partners. I was knocking on doors at OEMs. I was trying to uncover opportunities at customers in the automotive tier one space, and did not have the benefit of advisors, did not have a board of directors, did not have a sales staff. It was just me working out of my basement. And I guess somehow I managed it, and I guess it's good and bad because part of the journey, this was before GAMIC. That was before, the audience here has these great resources available to it. I did it myself, and I bootstrapped it. I paid for it, maxed out my credit cards. I borrowed money from parents, my bank account. No venture capital. So, that's the hardship there. But I guess that the current part of my journey is that I'm not beholden to anyone, and we can kind of change and pivot and do what we need to do quickly because of that independence that we still have. So there's good and bad, and I think the acceleration that Julie and her team are experiencing is fantastic. We didn't have that chance back then, I applaud people for doing that. But there is another way. You can do it yourself.
All right, that's excellent. So now I want to ask Julie and Robert. Maybe how did you get your first pilot? I think you kind of mentioned it in your introduction, but let me reiterate it again. How did you get your first pilot? And then what advice would you give somebody who is trying to open that door to get that first pilot or first validation? Julie, you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to. The way that we got to the point of doing our first, demonstration on a commercial platform, first it was a long road. I think I had this idea coming into a startup that it's more like Shark Tank, where you pitch once and then it's done. And the relationships, it really is a relationship. It's like a back and forth. Even when you're fundraising, it's like that. And then also with the OEMs, you keep them up to date until you get to a point where it's compelling. And one of the big things that helped us there was getting OEMs to support us on grant applications to things like the Department of Energy or other small business grants. And so that really provides then the funding to do a project. And so, you know, for the OEM, what's in it for them initially is, okay, we get to see these guys do a project. And, you know, you out of that experience, not only get to do the project, but you get the OEM to help you decide and prioritize the hierarchy of risk that's in their mind. And that's just extremely valuable as you go on and build this value that you want to be most attractive to them. So it's really kind of finding a way to bring together the resources and then also the feedback from them to get to a point where they are compelled and want to then put in their own resources.
Interesting. So how about Robert, you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's obviously different for everybody how it all kind of comes together, and it has a lot to do with sort of the scale and complexity of the solution, right? For us, just coming out of the GAMIC program, I mean, we participated in the, we pitched at the final, you know, session at the SAE conference, had, as an example, had a good pitch, obviously won our e-mobility sort of space. And then I actually had from that direct pitch, right, I had some vendors come by, or some OEMs and Tier 1s actually come by and say, hey, this technology really looks interesting. I think there's a place for it in my company. I don't know where exactly it is yet, but I'm pretty sure there's a fit. And that just took multiple conversations to turn, you know, one or two of those actually into actual doing a design prototyping sort of phase, right? So it's a lot of beating the bush and trying to find those customers that have interest in what you're doing, right? And sometimes it's a really clear thing, and sometimes it's a little bit more obtuse, and you got to kind of tweak it, right? For us, again, it's not a gear system is specifically designed for a particular application. We have a fundamental technology, but it can be used 1,000 different ways, right? So really trying to figure that out was important. But getting the awareness out there is sort of the first step, right? So that's why I say participating in these kind of projects and programs like GAMIC is so important to get the visibility out there. And then you don't know where the customer is going to use it sometimes, right? Or how they're thinking about how they're going to use it. You know, so, and these things are ongoing. We've got now a half a dozen sort of projects underway, and they're all completely different, right? And which is great, but it takes a lot of time too. So, you know, I think it's a fun process, but like Mark said originally, right? You have to have the appetite for it and the you know, persistent sort of attitude to get, you know, it's going to take a while, and especially in automotive. One of the other, just a side point, is one of the customers we talked to, we thought, hey, customer interest, we went to a meeting with, we met these guys in Germany, they were in Switzerland, went down to see them in Switzerland for an automotive Tier 1, and they said, great, you got some excellent technology. So our time horizon is 5 to 7 years from idea to getting into market, and we went, you know, so you got to think about how long this is going to take for, especially if you're talking about automotive type stuff. It can be a long journey to get it to market, right?
That is true. That is true. You know, I want to ask a follow-up question on that. How do you got your first pilot and then you work with the OEMs or say Tier 1s? What happens to your intellectual property agreements? Because if they want to help you or jointly develop something, did you have any challenges in that process, or how did you overcome those? Both of you. I mean, go ahead, Robert.
I'll give it quick. So yeah, so our model is a full IP licensing model. So we have, again, this platform technology can be applied different ways. So our model is to license our IP to a Tier 1 or an OEM to go build it into a product, right? Okay. So that conversation happened really early in any of these discussions, where we build it into our model to say, okay, here's what our effective license program is going to be like. And it's a model, and it's flexible for each customer, and it's always based on, you know, things like geographical coverage, maybe a box around what specifically it can be used for, which markets, and so on, right? And then it's basically saying, if you want any sort of exclusivity, which everybody always asks for, you say that's great, but that's going to cost you a lot more than just a regular license. And then you know, it's the discussion. But nobody is negative about that. They all appreciate that you have IP and that's your model, and that's okay, right? So everybody's pretty accustomed to dealing with sort of IP and how to license it effectively. And I don't think people are usually try to steal it. Most people get really freaked out about stealing IP and stuff. I think it's less than people think is a problem.
Okay. How about Julie? You have any comment on that?
Yeah, just that, one thing is having your IP in order in advance of trying to enter into any of these, types of agreements, even if it's relatively informal. And then, as a startup, you should have a law firm and sort of some sort of standard non-disclosure agreement. The OEM who is bigger than you will probably want you to use their form. And so you can kind of push back with your lawyers and tweak it a little bit so it's not uneven. But it's fairly standard. There are ways to do this because no one builds something completely from the ground up 100% on their own. Partnerships are just essential in this industry, and so there are standard ways to go about it. And then as a startup, you just need to arm yourself to be entering into those agreements on the best footing you can.
Very true. Very true. So audience, please enter your questions into Q&A box. We have about 15 minutes, and I would like to take as many questions from you too, because I have a few more questions to ask. But let me jump to the Q&A box and see the audience questions. There is one question for Robert. Larry Cow, he says, how can he make sure his startup can receive the licensing fee timely?
Yeah, excellent question, Larry. And what our model is such that normally people say, well, I'll pay you a license when it's commercial and you're actually making the product. What we are look to is actually have a license agreement that probably has an element of a prepaid royalty that they can burn off as they kind of start to commercialize. So we look for some upfront license fee that's offset by long-term royalties, right? And it's a balancing act depending on when you want to start and how you get going, right? And even we have a development license type program as well, where under development, you basically get a fee up front for that includes a development license. So many ways to sort of address getting some upfront funding from that licensing as you grow the business.
Okay, very good. Now there is another question we have is, are autonomous vehicle technologies an increasing level of AI in the vehicles, the showrooms and factory causing you to modify any components your business has plans? I mean, I think it's an open for anyone.
So I'll volunteer with a big yes as an answer. So that's kind of our pivot. When we started up, we had a different technology direction, and through time we grew that. But with the cybersecurity pivot that we made, part of the story is related to autonomous vehicles. So that's kind of our niche there, and making autonomous vehicles more secure. If I could, Vic, add maybe to the conversation a moment ago about IP. Kind of an observation that I have is that that's, again, the way to go. I mean, the way for the nirvana for every startup is to have a strong board of directors, to get your VCs capital lined up, and then have all the IP in order and license, and away you go. Right? So didn't happen to me, and doesn't happen to a lot of startups. What we, I think, could offer is there's an easier way. I don't know what John would think about this, but there would be, I think, an easier way to engage companies if you were able to, if your technology, if your was capable of a simple buy-sell agreement. And what I mean by that is that develop something and produce it, whether it's a software piece or a hardware piece or a gear or a part of an engine injector system or something like that. That's not always practical to do because you're part of a bigger ecosystem. But I would say if you have an opportunity to focus on producing what you've invented, or at least start a small-scale production, In my experience, it's a lot easier to get yourself into the market and established.
Very good.
I'd like to comment on that, if I may. I
Yeah.
wholeheartedly agree, and I have a long list of things that I use in my technology evaluation, and I didn't get to it before, but one of them definitely is the proof of concept. And or is there any kind of hardware or data beyond only the analytical piece of it? And in the eyes of the manufacturing world, if there is a proof of concept or a prototype in an application environment, it's been proven to be, at least on a concept level, debugged to show that, to validate that the technology works. That just raises the level significantly of, let's say, the validity and seriousness for that particular product. And I want to throw in one other comment too, with regard to what Robert mentioned, which is true in the automotive sector. To be on an architect, if it's a disruptive technology, get in the program planning, that has to be basically decided anywhere from 3 to 4 years, depending on the system. Software is a little different, but if it's hardware based, especially if it's in a propulsion system, it's a long way out. I often advise startups to consider other applications as a pilot outside of automotive first. Last year I was working with a company that had an energy storage technology, and got kind of steered towards first application in bicycles for e-bikes. Time to market's much smaller. The validation costs are much smaller. Yes, the revenue isn't as big, but it gets you a pilot, and it in effect becomes a proof of concept that you can then take to a bigger market. It could be an industrial application, could be commercial vehicles, where the end user are not the general public, but professional drivers, more data driven, more chances to pilot production. So another thing to consider in that road to validation towards automotive.
So, so going to the next question that I have is, you got your first pilot and you got some validation, and how do you scale your inroads into that organization? And what happens, because you want to increase your valuation for those milestones you are trying to meet for your VCs or your investors. Did you guys any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a quick answer. I mean, every time from us, from a fundraising validation perspective, they kind of go hand in hand, right? So the more you validate and the more down the path you get with the customer,
Right.
the more you can go into the market and say, hey, look at, we started with bootstrapping. We did some angel funding. We've done 2 little rounds of angel funding to get us to the next stage. And each stage, basically, we've validated with some more prototypes and some more validation, right? We're at the stage now where we're trying to do that next level of scale, and getting some results of some final prototypes, or more commercial ready type prototypes is where we are now. That should give us the next sort of milestone valuation. So it's a long journey to get there, especially in hardware, because it takes time to cycle these things. But I always think of it's you just have to have that in mind, have a plan of how that's going to, how your funding is going to work along your valuation and everything else, and where you're going to get the money along the way to do it, right? We've been fortunate that we've got customer money, we've got government money, we've got angel money, we've got our own money that we've thrown into it to make it happen. But you got to think about all these things as you're building your journey, right? And it'll change. Like everything you plan today is going to change in whatever time, anyways.
Sure.
But you got to start somewhere. Right?
Anybody else has any comment on that? So the next one, I wanted to check with you, especially John, for the startups, the challenge is once maybe they got introduced to you, and then they have to think about this in a large corporation, it's not only one engineering director or manager or decision maker. Now you got a lot of people to deal with, purchasing and engineering and the finance and any other stakeholders. How do you navigate that landscape? What any suggestions, idea, thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, Vic. Depending on the size of the company, it can be a daunting task to try and figure out inside of a large organization, especially the OEMs, the major tier ones, who are the decision makers, and who are the advocates, and what influence do they have. But in general, we're selling to, or you're selling to as a startup, to the engineers, to the technical community, especially the advanced engineering group. Very often there will be a product release group that's working on getting programs into production. There might be an advanced group for pre-program, and then maybe an R&D group that's a little further out. Getting an advocate inside the company is not always easy, but that's sometimes can be a make or break deal, because to make things work within the company, you're probably, from the outside, it's going to be very hard to do. There's got to be somebody who is an advocate inside the company, who has credibility from a technical standpoint, who is a decision maker, or who has access and influence on the decision makers. That's a really key thing, because then they can help you navigate, or they can navigate for you, coordinating the support, understanding the process inside the company, and who are the people to influence.
That's a great advice. I mean, that's very true. Maybe if anybody has any quick comment, because we have about 5 minutes and I want to capture a couple more questions.
On that regard, Vic, another thing is you don't know what you don't know. So you could have a very strong advocate, but you don't know the politics inside your customer. You don't know who's pushing a different solution from a different direction, from a different department. And, it can be mighty frustrating. You get pretty darn close to the goal line, you think, and then all of a sudden something happens with budgets cutting or something else comes out of the blue. So your customers are hedging their bets as well. They're not putting all their eggs in your basket. You can bet on that. It's all part of hustle. It's all part of that hard work that you put in. And it's all part of showing that results, that you mean, you do what you mean, and you can deliver. So it's all about working with people. That's really interesting for engineers sometimes to accommodate.
If I could add one more point to what you said, Mark, I think depending on the product, depending on the technology, very often it's the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers that are actually developing the technology and getting it ready. And the OEMs, and there's exceptions, but the OEMs very often are looking to a way to bring the technology to them. And very often they want it through a valid, existing, approved supplier in their supply base, and they can trust it. So sometimes you have to work both ends, but to get it to market, very often the OEM will want a supplier in the supply base to actually facilitate and do the validation and do the legwork to bring it forth to the market. So something to consider.
Very, very practical. I mean, we all have been there in dealing with the OEMs. So
Rick,
here are,
sorry, one more quick thing on
sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
on that is that I think one of the things that a lot of startups really have to think about is ensuring that they have the right team in place to take it to market. For us in particular, we have, my role is purely on the business development, corporate development side of the house. I'm technical to the degree that I need to be technical, but then I have a CTO that is on the technical side, and it's a very important sort of distinction between the two. And as John said and Mark said, right, you've got to understand the ecosystem and the dynamics of the company you're dealing with. And that's not traditionally a engineering strong point. It's more of a business development sales strong point. So you really have to have that balance, because you know, as a sales guy, I've been in sales and business development for years, and I get no more times than I get yes, right? And so but you keep pushing through it. My partner, the engineer, the first time he gets a no, it's like, oh, it's no. I said, no, no, no. That doesn't mean no. That just means not yet. So just keep going. Let's keep going. Keep going. Right? So,
Very true. Very true.
That means ask more questions.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
They didn't mean no. They just meant no, we're not quite sure, right? That's
Yeah,
all.
right. Very true. Very true. So here are a couple of quick questions, and if you don't mind, we might just go a couple of minutes over. But let's give a quick answer to these. How do you determine? This is anonymous. How do you determine what engineering work you should do internally, and what you should outsource? And is there a benefit in outsourcing your engineering development? What is you guys have thought about it? Anything?
I'll give a quick answer for us. We have some internal development. Our CTO, actually the inventor, but in terms of building the engineering team, we've actually done a lot of outsourcing and building an outside design services sort of group alongside us. And that's actually been very helpful for us because it helps the outside world actually educate themselves about our technology. So we build our sort of network as we're getting services done. So it's worked for us. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
Right.
I think keeping things that are central to your IP or anything that you would even keep as a trade secret, obviously, would have to be internal. And then also thinking about, you know, when you're a startup, you have like a fairly small budget and you can only hire people in integer amounts typically. So especially if it's only like a third of the time that you would need some expertise, you have to hire that out or hire someone who can wear more than one hat. So part of it is just figuring out who you can get and who you can't.
So here's an interesting question. This is from Sharan Talwani. He's asking, are there any complementary areas to your businesses that you would like to see a startup engage in?
I'll take that one. You know, one thing that I would advise any startup is make sure that you are recognized in your field as the leader. And part of that is getting you know, involved in SAE and other organizations. But to the question, I would say teaching. So I'm an adjunct professor at a couple universities locally here, and I'd say that offers a huge amount of opportunities and synergies that you could leverage. So some kind of position like that also helps build your resume too.
Okay, yeah, very true. Thank you. And now, so I think we are at the end of the clock. I would like to invite David Stout and the panelists. Thank you very much. It has been a great, lively conversation. David, would you like to close out and just?
Sure. If you could share the screen.
You can. Oh, you want me to share my screen? Okay.
Can you see it now?
We see your screen.
Okay. We've been doing this GAMIC challenge for a long time, and the quality of the people applying and winning is getting better and better all the time, and we're very proud of it. I just wanted to remind everybody that our applications this year are due by the 1st of December. You can check the GAMIC event website or go to F6S where the applications are to be done. It's an easy process, and we're looking forward to having our mentors organized to support the semifinalists and the finalists, ending in the April time frame in conjunction with the SAE World Congress in 2021. I'm very grateful to all the comments from our panelists today, because I think they've added a great deal of perspective for anyone that's new in this process or considering how to expand and grow. So I want to thank everybody today for listening, and thanking everybody today for contributing. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.